We're really thrilled tonight to welcome Stephanie Foo. She's the author of What My Bones Know, a memoir of healing and complex trauma. It's the first literary memoir to tackle the science and psychology of complex PTSD. And previously, she was a producer at This American Life, and she helped create Snap Judgment. And she has also had work in the New York Times, Vox, 99% Invisible, and Reply All. Thank you, Stephanie, for being with us. And we're really thrilled to have our author, Hilary Frank. Anyone who has read here, I consider our author. So. Hilary, she is the creator of The Longest, Shortest Time, an award-winning podcast about the surprises and absurdities of raising other humans. And Here Lies Me. So this is like really small print. So it's a fiction podcast about the harassment in middle school, which we can all relate to. She's also the author and illustrator of 3 young adult novels, and her latest book, Weird Parenting Wins, which we have a couple copies here. The subtitle is Bathtub Dining, Family Screens, and Other Hacks from the Parenting Trenches. So our book. But thank you. Hilary got her start in radio on This American Life, and with a story recorded entirely on a shiny red boombox and a micro cassette answering machine. So it's great. And you were the reason why we were able to invite Stephanie here tonight. So thank you for helping to make this happen, and welcome everyone. And go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming, everyone. Really appreciate it. This is quite the showing. I feel so honored. I'm going to start off with just a really quick reading from the prologue of this book. Okay. I've suffered from anxiety and depression since I was 12 years old. The pain is a fanged beast that I've battled 100 times throughout the years. And every time I think I've cut it down for good, it reanimates and launches itself at my throat again. But in recent years, I'd convinced myself that this battle was completely pedestrian. I mean, 20-something millennials are all really stressed out, aren't they? Isn't depression just shorthand for the human condition? Who isn't anxious here in New York, the capital of neuroticism? That is, until I turned 30. One by one, I'd watched my erratic friends hit 30 and quickly become adults. They reported that they had less energy, so they stopped caring as much about what other people thought and settled into themselves. Then they bought beige linen pants and had babies. I've waited for that mature, elevated calm, but my 30th birthday was months ago, and if anything, I care more than ever. I care about shopping cart placement and plastic in the oceans and being a good listener. I care about how I seem to fuck everything up all the time. I care, and I hate myself for it. My friends got one thing right, though. I'm so tired now. 30 years on this earth, and I've been sad at least half that time. On my subway rides to work, I stare at the supposedly neurotic masses who are calmly staring at their phones and think, maybe I'm different from them? Maybe something's wrong with me. Something big. In the past week, I've been scrolling through various mental illnesses on WebMD, searching for symptoms that sound familiar to find an answer. Now, near the end of my session with Samantha, after we've exhausted the usual pep talks and affirmations, I gather up my courage to ask about my internet diagnosis. Do you think I'm bipolar? Samantha actually laughs. You are not bipolar, I'm sure of it, she says. And that's when she asks, do you want to know your diagnosis? I don't yell, lady, I've been seeing you for a fucking decade. Yes, I want to know your damn diagnosis. Because Samantha taught me about appropriate communication. Thanks, Samantha. Instead, I say, yes, of course. Something in her jaw becomes determined and her gaze direct. You have complex PTSD from your childhood, and it manifests as persistent depression and anxiety. There's no way someone with your background couldn't have it, she says. Oh, yeah, PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder.
That's what I figured.
That was what I figured. I had a crappy childhood, so I kind of figured that. Not just PTSD, complex PTSD. The difference between regular PTSD and complex PTSD is that traditional PTSD is often associated with a moment of trauma. Sufferers of complex PTSD have undergone continual abuse, trauma that has occurred over a long period of time over the course of years. Child abuse is a common cause of complex PTSD, she says. Then her eyes drift to the corner of the screen. Oh, we're out of time. Let's continue this next week. The first thing I do after our Skype window closes is bring up Google. I've never heard of complex PTSD. Surprisingly, there aren't that many results. I go from Wikipedia to a government page about CPTSD as it relates to veterans. I read the list of symptoms. It is very long. And it is not so much a medical document as it is a biography of my life. The difficulty regulating my emotions, the tendency to overshare and trust the wrong people, the dismal self-loathing, the trouble I have maintaining relationships, the tendency to be aggressive but unable to tolerate aggression from others. It's all true. It's all me. The more I read, the more every aspect of my personhood is reduced to deep diagnostic flaws. I hadn't understood how far the disease had spread, how complete its takeover of my identity was, the things I want, the things I love, the way I speak, my passions, my fears, my zits, my eating habits, the amount of whiskey I drink, the way I listen and the things I see, everything, all of it is infected. My trauma is literally pumping through my blood, driving every decision in my brain. It is this totality that leaves me frantic with grief. For years, I've labored to build myself a new life, something very different from how I was raised. But now, all of a sudden, every conflict I've encountered, every loss, every failure and foible in my life can be traced back to its root, me. I am a textbook case of mental illness. The orange walls of my office close in on me. I don't belong here. I don't belong anywhere. I grab my coat and rush out of the building into the cold air, but even outside I haven't escaped. With every step, one word echoes in my head. Broken, broken, broken. For 10 years, I thought I could outrun my past, but today I realize that running isn't working. I need to do something else. I need to fix this, fix myself, to revisit my story, one that has until now relied on lies of omission, perfectionism, and false happy endings. I need to stop being an unreliable narrator. I need to look at myself, my behaviors, and my desires with an unflinching, meticulous eye. I need to tease apart the careful life I have crafted for myself, the one that is threatening to unravel at any minute. And I know where I have to begin. Every villain's redemption arc begins with their origin story. So it does get more.
So I'm so excited to be interviewing Stephanie. I love this book so much. It is, there's a lot of darkness to it, but there's a lot of light also. And I personally found it to be actually a page turner. I think I was afraid to read it because I was afraid of what I might learn about my friend Stephanie, but also like just what it might make me think about myself and about the world and how people interact in families. And I actually found it to be just like, I couldn't put it down. Like I just, drank it up. But before we begin, I just want to say, I think Margot handed out some index cards. That's how we're going to be doing Q&A at the end. So as a question occurs to you, just jot it down and we'll be collecting them at the end. And then I'm just going to pick the ones for Stephanie that we're going to do at the end. So, but I want to talk about that word villain that you just said. I know that a lot of the research you did about CPTSD, made you feel like there was a lot wrong with you, and there weren't answers out there about how to heal from this. It was just like lists of symptoms. So what made you think that healing was possible?
I had to believe it was possible. Literally, I was like, there has to be a way, or else what? Or else I just moved through this world being in pain and hurting people for the rest of my life. I just knew I couldn't do that because I love the people around me too much. And no matter what I was going to do, I was going to find something. I was going to fix it in some way. And many of the trauma books that I read had some like brief anecdote here or there, or of like, oh, 15% of people will heal or whatever. And I was like, I don't care what I'm going to do. I'm going to like knock down doors and rip apart the floor and like take sledgehammers to walls if I can figure out one thing that makes this better.
And did you have an image in your mind of like what being better would look like?
Yeah, I think in my head, being better looked like the people I saw on Instagram who seemed to be happy all the time. I was just like, oh, it seems like this girl's always out to brunch. And she's smiling. She just seems like the world is easy and it's gonna be hunky-dory once I'm fixed. And of course that's not anyone's truth. And it certainly was not mine in the end. Which was a part of healing, just recognizing that nuance and feeling feelings in life is totally okay.
So, a lot of my work has been around interviewing people about family. So I want to like go deep on the family stuff. Your book is a mix of memoir and like journalistic research. And so I found the intergenerational trauma stuff really fascinating. And I think it's something that like a lot of people have been talking about lately, and a lot of us have in our pasts for various parts of the world. And but I think like it's a term that kind of gets tossed around, and we don't really know the full meaning of it and like the science of it. And I really loved that you really dug into the science of it. So I wondered if you can talk about what you learned generally about how trauma is literally passed down to people through DNA, and how that impacted you as an individual.
Yeah, so all of us have an epigenome that is sort of like a spark notes on top of our genome that sort of tells our body what to encode and what not to encode, and kind of can turn genes on and off. And our epigenome is susceptible to changes through trauma, through the way that we live our lives. And there's evidence in some scientific studies with mice in particular that they pumped the scent of cherry blossoms into cages with mice and shocked them. And then they tried to do the same thing with their children. They would put the scent in, but they wouldn't shock them. But still, the children and the children after that were afraid when they smelled that smell, because we've come to realize that parts of our epigenome, like for example, Holocaust survivors, many of them have a specific gene that has been altered, and that can happen with their ancestors or not their ancestors, but the opposite way. They're descendants. And I think that we can see that essentially trauma is an evolutionary adaptation. If you're surviving something like the Holocaust or, wars, like my family survived the, several colonizations and the Malayan Emergency and World War II in Malaysia, my ancestors had to become hypervigilant in order to survive those conflicts, because, trauma isn't just something that breaks us, it's something that keeps us alive. And trauma only becomes a mental illness, or complex PTSD only becomes a mental illness in times of peace, when everything is cushy and there is brunch. Like in times of war, I would be perfectly sane and functional and like probably, maybe even better adapted to survive.
Why? Because like what would be serving you well in those situations?
Well, I tend to detect threat very quickly. So, I'd be running out the door faster than some other people in here, maybe. I'm very resourceful. I'm very hypervigilant in terms of like getting everything right all the time. And if you see a tiger coming at you, and this second you see it out of the corner of your eye, you want to be like either amped up, full of adrenaline, ready to fight, ready to run. If you don't have any forms of trauma and you're just not afraid of anything, you're probably not going to be so good at surviving an incident like that. So in some ways, I'm a product of these evolutionary adaptations.
Yeah, and when you found out that that was true, that this is like embedded in your body, literally, did it make you feel better or worse? Like, because on the one hand, there's nothing you can do about it, but then on the other hand, there's an explanation.
I think the point at which I was researching this, I was trying to figure out why this happened to me, why I had been abused by my parents in this way, because I didn't know much about my parents' history. So it kind of made me feel better in that I was like, this immense cruelty did not just sprout out of nowhere. My story does not begin with my parents. My story begins literally generations ago. It's a very long story. So I did think that made me feel better. And I at no point in my journey did I quite ever give up the fact that I would claim whatever agency that I could claim for myself. And there was like a Chinese quote that I learned during my research that like a third of the universe is under the control of heaven, a third is under the control of civilization, something like that, and a third is in your hands. And so I think I've come to sort of hold that as true. Like, I don't have control over everything, but if I can get that little third and take that in my hands, then that's all I can do.
I like that. I want to talk about the term model minority. And I think I was actually, my husband is here in the back. So he is reading your book too. And he was like, I feel like this is like breaking news, like the way she wrote about model minority. We hear a lot about immigrant parents who have high expectations of their children because they want their children to be successful. But in your family and in a lot of families in the community where you grew up, there was a darkness behind that success. So can you talk about that and kind of your understanding of what model minority can mean?
Yeah, I think the term model minority, first of all, it's so problematic because to imply that there are model minorities implies that there are not model minorities, which is silly. But I think, there was this understanding where in the city that I grew up, which was San Jose, California, which is super Asian, that my school, which was like 70% Asian, was the good school in the district because we got the highest test scores and the teachers loved us Asian kids because they were like, you guys study so hard and you're so easy and you're not you don't make trouble. And when I went back and tried to interview the teachers at my school, and I was like, did you see the darkness? Did you see the trauma? Did you see that we were suffering? They were just like, I wouldn't use the word trauma because trauma would imply look at these, ghetto schools that have like gangs and shootings and sexual assault and all of that terrible stuff, poverty. You guys have iPhones, so I wouldn't call it trauma. And I just took all I had not to just yell at them because I was like, I don't think that's right, because what I saw was real trauma. What I saw was, the reason why we were getting those A's and A minuses was because if we went home and got with a B plus, we would be severely beaten. I had friends who were burnt with cigarette butts at home. I know that I had friends who were thrown out of their house. I know friends that didn't have any money, and yeah, maybe the parents spent all of the money on the laptop, but like that meant that the parents would have to go hungry for a week or something. So yeah, it just meant that we didn't get the help that we needed. It was just all people could see was our success, and that meant that we were completely okay and that we didn't need anything, and that we didn't need to be resourced. And I think that was dangerous for us, and in particular for, I know me and a lot of my friends, we just thought, okay, if we cover up all of our hurt with success, career-wise, academic success, then everyone will see us as fine and okay, and the internal turmoil within us can be papered over and it won't matter until we had our nervous breakdowns in our mid-20s or 30s or whatever, and just everything came apart because we finally realized that no matter how much success we had, the pain would still be there.
What do you think that like school counselors and teachers should be looking out for?
I think that they should be looking out for kids who are getting overly emotional or upset about getting bad grades or freaking out about being perfect. I think that, there were things like, one of my closest friends, he would come to school with bruises all over his body. That's pretty obvious, but still, it was overlooked. I think, you should look at an Asian kid the same as you would any other kid in terms of that. And I think, have you guys seen the TikTok of the Korean math professor who, can I find it for you 1 second? Hold on. Wait, albums, videos. Yeah. I'm going to play her for you just a little bit.
You have to remember that you can do it. You can do it, and until you get it, try it. Don't compare with anybody. Everybody's special, right? If you start looking at other people, you'll be depressed. Always look at the sky, and then to look at it, it's so beautiful, and you are alive. That's count. And so if you didn't do well, so what, right? You're a nice person. That's count. So education, don't cheat.
Anyway, I just think maybe we should focus a little bit more on that than just on obsessive academic perfection, and more on teaching kids how to love themselves, how to love others. I don't remember what a mitochondria is, but I think if I had been taught how to love myself and others, that would have stuck with me, because that's a skill I would use every day.
Mm-hmm. What do you know about how to stop the pattern of intergenerational trauma? Like if you have intergenerational trauma in your family and you don't want to pass it down to your children, what can you do?
I don't think there is literally enough research to understand how to change our genes. I think that there have been instances where, in mice, they have injected a certain chemical in mice, and all of the genetic markers popped off. But if I were to do that to you, I have no idea who you would become. You probably wouldn't be Hillary anymore. So, but I do think that we can, try and teach ourselves the difference between safe and unsafe environments. Try to feel safer in this world, and try to, certainly for our children, make them feel safer in this world. They may have some genetic predisposition towards anxiety, but we can do all we can to encourage them and teach them that how to use that in productive ways when there's real danger, and how to teach them to relax in our arms when there is not.
Yeah, I think reading your book, I was thinking about how, talking to a lot of parents, I think that a lot of parents' biggest fear is passing down our parents' biggest mistakes unintentionally, of just doing it. And then the other big mistake people can make is overcompensating, and which can be just as much of a problem. And yeah, I don't know. I guess I wonder. You hint in the book that you'd like to be a mother someday, and I don't know if this is something you're okay talking about, but I wonder if you've imagined, what you've taken all these steps to kind of love yourself and change yourself, have you thought about what it would look like if you were in the position of being a parent?
Well, I've certainly talked to you about being like, well, I'm going to need to call you because you have all the tips. And so I don't know. I don't think we ever know, for the parents in the room, like, you never really know what it's like to be a parent until you're a parent, right? So I think that it will be like having complex PTSD. It's never solved. It's just new problems and new things to grieve, and new things come up, and then you learn about them on the way. And I plan on being in therapy the whole time, so my therapist can tell me what I'm doing wrong or right. And you know, there's lots of things that I'm working on now for the future. Like, I say mean things about myself a lot, you know, like just bumbling around the house. I'm like, I'm an idiot. And my husband's like, you know, maybe our kid would not enjoy, maybe you don't want to pass down, like normalize saying I'm an idiot all the time and about yourself. And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. So I'm sure it's going to be a constant battle.
I think that's true. Like, I think when you're a parent, you just become so much more aware, you know, of the things that just come naturally to you, like the kind of like self-talk. And you realize like you have to watch everything you say, you know, because someone else is listening.
Yeah, I'm very scared about that.
Yeah. But I also think that it can be really healing, you know, when you can like just be like, oh, I'm in control now, and I'm gonna do some stuff differently.
It gives you like more stakes to healing.
Yeah, and more like agency.
Yeah. And you get to see the payoff.
Yeah.
More.
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah. I think so. So, you know, I think, you know, you and I have both done some writing about trauma, and I think that for me, I don't know about you, but like the act of writing about trauma can be very cathartic, right? And like I almost feel like that's the kind of writing that just pours out of me faster than anything else. Like the words just come really easily. But it's one thing to write about it and another to be like talking about it. I find those to be two very different things. To be like speaking publicly, which like now I'm having you do. So I have like mixed feelings about this, but it's like it can be really taxing to have to repeat your story over and over to strangers, whether it's in an interview or in an event like this. And you can be in situations where like strangers, they feel like they know you because they know your story, and they trust you, and they want to tell you about their story. And when that happens repeatedly, it can be a lot to hold. And I just wonder, like, how has that been for you since the book has come out, and how have you managed it?
It's been okay. I feel really lucky. I don't know if it's because I like literally taught people how to treat me in this book, but I feel like people have been really respectful and generous, and I haven't gotten a whole lot of trauma dumping. And I think I've just gotten literally like a dozen messages a day from people saying like, this book saved my life. This book changed my life. This book helped me talk about my trauma to my husband of 12 years for the first time. You know, this book helped me finally have hope for the first time, or helped me finally figure out what trauma or what therapies might work for me. And so all of that has just felt really amazing. That's literally why I wrote the book, is I didn't want anyone to feel as alone and freakish as I clearly did when I was first diagnosed. And in turn, it's made me feel less alone, because people have been sharing with me, you know, I have endometriosis, or, you know, I have complex PTSD, people with complex PTSD are coming out of the woodworks like everywhere. They're everywhere. I was like, oh, here they are at NPR. Here they are at the New York Times. Like, wow. And that's really, again, I felt so alone at first, and now I wrote this so other people would feel less alone, but now I feel less alone. That being said, the book has been out for a month and a half. So, I mean, ask me that question again in 6 months and we'll see.
You were talking about Instagram before and like, wanting to be like the curated person's life. But I think that that's so relatable because I think it's so easy, right, to feel envy for people's work achievements or what their home looks like or their romantic relationships. But I also think that happens with family, and that's not something I hear people talk about too much. To be like envying what somebody seems to have either with their children or with their parents or their siblings. And it's, that's curated too, right? It's like everyone's performing their relationships, but I, it is real for a lot of people. And I think, so I think that it's easy to have envy, like family envy on Instagram. And I wonder, like, do you have that? And if so, how do you manage it?
Oh yeah. I hate Facebook and Instagram during Christmas and Mother's Day and Father's Day. Like, I don't want to see your mom. I don't care about your mom. Like, I'm glad that you have your mom, but I don't want to see your face today. So yeah, I just turn off social media on days like that. And I do my own thing. I try to distract myself. I try to spend time with the people that I know love me and who I love. Or I'll just like play video games all day and or watch TikTok. And I think outside of those major holidays too, which are the hardest days, I think I've been able to be very, very grateful for my chosen family. A lot of my chosen family is comprised of people with complex PTSD who also don't have relationships with their parents. And so we are each other's brothers and sisters, and we care for each other as much as we would our own family. And I count myself extremely lucky to have that.
I've heard you talk about this, but I just want to, in the context of this conversation about family, what do you think about the phrase "blood is thicker than water"?
I think it's ridiculous. I just think love is love, and when you commit yourself so deeply to another, like my best friends I've been best friends with them since I was 9 years old, and I don't think it can get thicker than that. Like we've been through hell and back with each other. We were there for each other when we were like 12 years old and our parents were abandoning us, or like we carried each other through that. And they are not my blood, but I would trust them with anything. I would trust them much more than people in my own family. So I think that our society does not perhaps celebrate incredible friendship like that as much as those friendships deserve.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think just because you were like born into a family, there are people who would say like you need to I think that especially I've heard like in immigrant communities too, like there's talk about how family is more important than anything, right? And I think it's really refreshing to hear you talk about chosen family and just redefining what family can mean.
I think love is more important than anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maintaining those loving relationships where when someone loves you the way that you deserve to be loved, that is more important than anything.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone doesn't love you the way that you deserve to be loved, even if they're your mom,
Yeah.
then
You know, you talk about trauma as a lot of things, but one of the things you talk about it as is mourning the childhood that you could have had but didn't. And you know, we all need to be taken care of, and when your parents are not capable of doing that, then you must do it for yourself in order to survive. And that brought you to this whole like self-care journey, right? Like learning self-care and self-love. And this is another one of those terms that just gets like talked about a lot, and like you see it on Instagram a lot.
mm-hmm.
And I think for a long time I saw people talking about self-care and was like, what are you even talking about? Like what is that? What does that look like? Okay, yeah, I should do it, but like how do you do it, and how do you like say like I'm really like feeling myself today or something, like, and mean it, right? But your book, I think, made it into something tangible for me, like, because your scenes of like your journey towards self-care, and I hate the word journey, but that's what it is, like your journey toward learning self-care, all those scenes are just as hard-earned and complex as the scenes of abuse. And because it's not just like, you know, you go and you meditate and like everything's better. Like you had to like try a lot of different techniques before you found the ones that would work for you. So I think I just wonder, like, for people here tonight, if they're trying to figure out what self-care means to them, do you have thoughts about just how to begin?
I think self-care, first of all, like isn't as simple as like I'm going shopping.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's like dissociation, which dissociation can be self-care sometimes, but I think it's a little bit more complex than let me just make myself feel as good as I possibly can in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not with whatever coping mechanism I have, like a bottle of wine, you know. I think self-care can sometimes hurt a lot. Like, you know, in the book I use this example of, you know, so you burn a chicken in the oven, but you're starving,
Mm-hmm.
and you're mourning because like you can't go to your mom's house for dinner, or you don't have someone to call to complain about it or whatever. Self-care can sometimes just be sitting there and mourning that you don't have that support system, but also sitting there and saying, yeah, that is sad, but you know, here are the people who do love you, or you're strong, you've got this, you know, like talking to yourself as you would, like taking care of your inner child, essentially. And taking care of your inner child can be something that makes you cry, and it can be hard, and it's hard to give yourself that big old hug and love yourself. And that in and of itself can be a whole journey of meditation and psychedelics and whatever, just like ascertaining that inner child and not hating that inner child or thinking that they're pathetic for needing that comfort, being able to instead give it freely and lovingly. That I think is like the form of self-care that's been most helpful to me. And also just a lot of forgiveness when I mess up, or if I dissociate, or if maybe, yeah, right now, like I am mourning a huge loss, and so I need to just go into the basement and be on my phone for 2 hours, then just sort of saying like that's what I needed for myself in that moment. I'm going to forgive myself, I'm going to start a new day, you know, all of the forgiveness for myself. That can be self-care too. I think self-care essentially doesn't need to cost money. You don't need to go anywhere to do it. It can be very deep and internal and personal. You can do it just in a dark room alone. And I think that kind of self-care is often the most profound, life-changing care.
Mm. So we're gonna turn to Q&A soon. I have one more question for you. You talked about CPTSD as having superpowers. What are your superpowers?
My superpowers are that during the pandemic, I was extremely prolific and just on top of my shit. And I got my book deal in February 2020, and I wrote this whole book during 2020. And like the whole world was like actually on fire around me. And I was just like, do, because my life has always felt like everything was on fire around me. So this was normal. And we have like scientific proof now that people with complex PTSD actually are extremely good at dissociation. So that would explain some things. My superpowers are that, my workaholism is actually born of complex PTSD, my like rigorous attention to detail and my skills, and those are a superpower. And also, I think I can be very empathetic and really kind and really like help people out of the dark. I think when you have complex PTSD and you heal from it, it's like walking through hell and back, and you have all of these amazing skills that you can now use to like shine a light for other people who are coming behind you. And the fact that like this book would never exist if I hadn't been brutally abused by my parents. This book exists because I have complex PTSD, but this book is helping thousands of people. So I think that in and of itself is evidence that people with complex PTSD can take our pain and do great things.
Well, I'm so sorry that all of this stuff happened to you. It's heartbreaking, but I'm also grateful for the book, so thank you for it.
Thank you for your great questions.
Yeah, so now, do you all want to pass your
Yep.
Yeah.
papers
Anyone
forward?
else? Any to hear again? Right. Started.
There you go. Okay, so Stephanie, do you think that being Asian amplifies the trauma because the culture puts so much focus on family bonds and obligation?
I don't know if I want to say that I think it's hard for everyone, regardless of culture or background. And I think, all different cultures and background have unique challenges. And I won't say that one is better or worse, but I do think that certainly there is a lot of pressure in Asian culture to put family above all else. And I think there is quite a culture of silence. I think that was probably the thing that was most difficult for me, was the silence and the secrecy that, you don't talk about it because it's shameful. That being said, I think, culture is not static. Culture is always changing, and I see no reason why we as the next generation coming up in America can preserve all our own traditions while doing a little bit better in that respect.
How do you manage people who doubt the profound suffering of CPTSD?
How do I manage them? I wrote a book about it. I was literally like, let me explain my whole thing to you. I think that was like literally how I did it.
Yeah. I think though also, well, your book, you said, has only been out for a month. It can come back in work situations, I think, when people, you're almost marked now because now you're like the trauma person. And I have found that people might like talk to you differently because they're like, oh, she's been through trauma.
you know what? It can't be worse than all the people who've been yelling at me in my job
Right.
for years.
Right.
So if you want to
There's
tiptoe
that
around me
too.
instead of yelling at me, I welcome that.
What has been the most useful or impactful self-help or therapy-focused book for you, or any memoirs that you love or have been influenced by?
Ooh. You know, The Collective Schizophrenias by Esme Wei-Jin Wang. I mean, it's a totally different mental illness that manifests extremely differently. But she talks a lot about stigmatization of mental illness and the brokenness of the DSM and our mental health care system in ways that I felt were that transcended, they're applicable to anybody who has a mental illness. So that was great. And I think the gentlest CPTSD book that I read was Journey Through Trauma by Gretchen Schmelzer. It's clear that she also suffered from trauma and was not just like, here's all the things wrong with you, but sort of felt like she was holding my hand throughout it.
Mm-hmm. Was it a challenge to reach the level of honesty and vulnerability that you did in your book? And if so, how did you navigate it in your writing process?
I think that certainly the first part one of this book, so I think it's 5 parts, and part 2 through 5 are all like me as an adult healing, but part 1 is the only part where it is the trauma of my childhood. And I think that was really the hardest part, unsurprisingly, because there was this twisted game of how do you write about the hardest things that have ever happened to you with an audience in mind and trying to entertain them.
Mm.
That was horrible. I was like, I'm trying to entertain people with my child abuse. Like, I'm trying to get them to keep turning the pages, It was just, it felt gross. And I think that one of the ways that I dealt with that was by dissociating and just being very matter of fact and very dry and almost cold in the way that I described these things that happened to me, because I didn't want to seem like, I don't know, dramatic, and I didn't want to make it seem juicy and tabloidy,
Mm-hmm.
But then my editor kept coming back and saying it doesn't feel real. I can't like connect to it. And everybody kept telling me that, like multiple readers and whatever. And so I just got really pissed off. And at a certain point in part 1, I do just write like, people keep asking me how I felt when I was getting horribly beaten. Like, I don't know how I felt. Fuck you for asking how I felt. Like, I was dissociated as shit. It probably sucked. How would you feel if you were a 5-year-old getting the shit kicked out of you? And I just wrote that, and my editor was like, yeah, that's good.
That was one of the most memorable lines for me. Definitely underlined that. Okay, this is from somebody who says, like you, I cut my father out of my life. I blamed aspects of my personality on him, but I had a son who I see so much of my foibles in him, and now I see my father as someone who suffered from trauma. How do you think of your parents after your journey writing this book?
I think that they were 2 people who were struggling with undiagnosed mental illness and certainly a lot of intergenerational trauma, because their parents had suffered through a lot. And their sadness was so big that it didn't allow them room to love me. And that doesn't mean that I need to forgive them or try to fix them or have them in my life even. But I guess I have more empathy for where they were coming from, and it just is too bad.
It also just like it gives you an understanding. too, like you were saying, of like seeking an understanding of why this happened.
The story is long.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are there any other index cards out there we have not yet collected?
Nope. Stephanie, thank you.
Thanks for having me.